Recording.
First recording.
Now where was the Facebook? Yeah.
There you go.
Facebook Live. And this is policies. Yes. Where their page of education. Yeah. We could also share it in the group. Revolving education.
I'll do both. Don't worry.
Okay. We just started a group, a Facebook group as well, because most of the content on the page is in Spanish to have the group more focused on international audience.
There we go.
There we go. I think we are. This is working already, and people can see us on Facebook. Cool. So
hello.
All good. Fantastic. So I'm gonna put you on the big screen, Peter, to see you well. For anyone that had signed us to the event, that had it there, noted down, they might have noticed that we have pushed it a couple of weeks. We had troubles with a hurricane that came over here in the Pacific coast of Mexico, where we are. It seemed that it was aiming exactly where we were living, but then at the last minute, it just shifted a bit more southwards.
And it went where the internet connections come from.
Yeah. So anyways, we were for a couple of weeks without much
completely isolated.
Yeah. But it's been a different experience. Actually, sometimes you need one of these big events to help you realize how uncertain life is and how little in control we are of our lives, to stop trying to control everything, which it seems to be everything under manageable, but no, there's tons of things that are beyond us, and we need to play with that uncertainty. Anyways, let's start the event. We are Luz, Solid, and David Caballero from Evolving Education, and we work to democratize educational practices that empower learners to take the responsibility for their learning, because we believe that the most important thing that any human being needs to learn is how to be an independent, lifelong learner. And that's what we have been learning around the world, visiting innovative schools and finding that that's something that many of them have in common, but they use very different practices to arrive to that goal. So that's the beauty, I think, of education, that we don't need to standardize everything and everyone do exactly the same way. There's lots of cultural differences and methodologies that we can use. And
there is not a single solution, but many possibilities, and each of us has to find their own way to apply it to their context.
Yeah. And it also gives lots of creativity to educators and how to do that, and changing and enjoying really that process. And today we have with us Peter Rawitsch. Am I pronouncing your surname well?
That's excellent, thank you.
And we know Peter since a while ago, when he had a Facebook group that was called "When Public Schools Reopen, We Don't Want to Go Back to Normal" during the pandemic. I think that's something that many people became very aware of during the pandemic. It was kind of an awakening moment, since education and school for many families was something that you just leave the kids there and you don't really interact that much with what's going on. And then when the kids were at home, and then they were more in contact with the contents, with the way they were taught, with the amount of time that kids spent doing exercises or looking at the screen, or the type of ways of learning. And many people started questioning, well, maybe there are other ways in which we can do this, because this looks very similar to the way I did when I was a kid already a long time ago. And part of that is respecting children's rights and respecting their agency, their freedom, satisfying their basic needs, like going to the toilet or things like that, which can be very simple things and that don't need to be dramatic changes in a school. I think that's something that many people ask us when we talk about student agency. It feels like you need to demolish the school building altogether, and change everything. It doesn't need to be so dramatic. It can be small steps, but from that mindset of respect, mutual respect, and horizontal relationships. So, but today we're gonna talk about activism to change. Yeah, yeah, I should have a podcast or something. Today we're gonna talk about changing education policies, because the more you realize that the change needs to be widespread, right? And it needs to affect many people. And sometimes there's those constraints that prevent you from doing the type of changes that you want to do. And we're glad to have someone that's been brave enough to encounter that massive bureaucratic engine and can tell us today a little bit about how that was. But to start with, we would like to get to know you a bit better, Peter. So we would love if you can tell us a bit about yourself, your path in education, which is a long one already, lots of different experiences, and what took you to decide at this point in your life, after many experiences, to also work in education from this angle of activism.
Well, I was very lucky as a student growing up that I had teachers that were very supportive of my own personal interests. In particular, I had a music teacher probably starting from 3rd grade. So I was probably 8 years old through 8th grade, which I was 13 years old. And it was during that period of time that I did a lot of songwriting. And I had a music teacher that encouraged me to do that, which is very different than what the music curriculum would have been at the time, where you had to sing certain songs and learn certain information or facts about music and music history. I was encouraged to do my own thing, to explore music on my own, and to pursue music as a creative activity, as opposed to being regurgitating somebody else's music. So that was a big influence on me. And then when I was, I think about 14 years old, my brother sent me a book. He was studying to be a teacher in college. It's my older brother. He sent me a book called Summerhill by A.S. Neal. And I read it to cover and fell in love with it. The idea of a school that was democratically run, where children had the same power and voice as the adults. Everyone got one vote on matters, where children could learn what was important to them, what they valued on their terms. That was something that I was very excited about, and actually decided as a freshman in high school at the age of 14 that I would become an educator. And I was really an outlier. None of my friends knew what they wanted to do. They were just in school, but I knew that was the path I wanted to take, and went on to get 2 education degrees, and started out by teaching 8-year-olds in 3rd grade in one state, and then eventually settled in the state of New York, where I taught 1st grade for 38 years.
Wow.
And it was pretty amazing to be in the same building, in the same community, teaching the same age group for that period of time, and seeing the changes that had taken place in education, going from relatively good to horrible. I was very lucky to have principals that supported some of what I'll call progressive, creative, maybe a little bit different approaches to allowing children to learn. But in those last 10 or 12 years, when testing became the priority, and teaching only reading, writing, and math, because that's all there was time for, the pushback was really hard. And I know in public education that there are set curriculum to follow. There are things you're supposed to do, but I thought I did a pretty good job of working around them and doing them in ways that were still supportive of children until the testing regime came in. I retired 2 years ago, and knew when I retired that I wanted to be involved in social justice. And when I moved to where I am now in North Carolina, there was plenty of issues, environmental issues. Our water is poisoned out here with horrible chemicals. There's voting issues, making sure that people have the right to vote. But the issue that really that I was drawn to was educational justice, and that's what I've been spending these past 2 years in retirement doing, working to improve learning for children and their families in our local schools.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I completely agree that since I like how you call it the testing regime. It's true, we kind of have forgotten that the most important thing is the relationship with the students and not so much to cover all that curriculum that, I mean, we might remember something or we might forget, but definitely having the possibility to create good relationships and helping them also in that emotional development is super essential for life. However, we maybe sometimes prioritize all that memorizing content.
I think the problem is the need to measure things, not to have data to show and say, oh, look how many kids are progressing to this stage to the next one. But what does that number really say about those people, about their human development, and what situation is creating that testing that is preventing them from develop other type of skills, like the extra creativity that you mentioned before, of writing your own songs when a kid,
or even learning because with all the stress and anxiety and so on, learning doesn't really happen. It's once that you have fear and stress, there is not deep learning. So
it's encouraging to me how many colleges and universities have dropped the testing requirement, because what they have found is that testing is not a good predictor of how a student will do at a college or university. And the fact is, the same is true working with 6- and 7-year-olds. Their test scores are not predictive of how they're going to do when they're teenagers or in a high school, or what they're going to do when they're grown up. It tells you how well they take a test. It tells you how they were feeling or doing in that specific moment, but it doesn't really give you solid information as to what their future holds. And it could be that horrible test takers are fabulous divergent thinkers, and that should be celebrated. And so we really need to look at other ways of celebrating learning, or more importantly, just focus on learning. The word teacher is not a good word in our vocabulary, because it already implies some power, a power relationship. If we focus on learning, then it's easier to envision children having agency over that you've already talked about. And therefore, the role of the adult is to facilitate, to be there, to provide the support a child needs on their own journey.
And I think that word facilitator is becoming more and more prevalent in many education scenarios. Someone that makes easier learning, and that's the focus now, rather than teaching you something specific that you're meant to learn.
Yeah, the same with learner and student, like making that change. And at the same time, we are always learning, right? There's not a point that we stop learning, so we are always learners.
I think you had that presentation, Peter, that you wanted to share with us. Would you like to?
I do. I wanted to have a chance to talk about what education law and policy looks like in the United States. And knowing that you have an international audience, I just thought a little background in that might be helpful in better understanding or giving a context to the work that I've been doing to bring about change. Hopefully some of it may be similar to other educators in other countries. They may see some similarities, and hopefully there'll be some takeaways at the end. So if you're ready, I'm happy to try to share my screen. This is always a moment of truth. Technology is wonderful when it works. So let's see first if I get, this says to share my screen, restart your audio sharing application. That's horrible. I just got a new pop-up menu, and it's from my computer. It's from my application. So let me cancel that for a minute and just
now.
Okay, so let's see. Do you see part of my screen right now?
Yes. Now, if you go to presentation mode, I think that will.
Going to presentation mode. So hopefully now all you see is my love our children.
Yes.
And so I will, I'll go ahead. We'll see if the video portion works a little bit later on, but otherwise I'll just continue from here. So I'm here to talk about activism to change educational policy. And I wanted just to give you a context of where I'm zooming from on the earth. I'm in the United States, and I just want to give you a brief lesson on things that have changed in the US. For example, the US used to be known, for helping to win World War II. My father actually was in the Army Air Corps. He was stationed actually in Leiston, England, where Summerhill School was located. A little bit of a coincidence there. But now the US is being known as a place for semi-automatic assault rifles. We've taken the, using guns to take over tyranny, and we now have tyranny in our country. You can buy beer at the age of 21, or you have to be 21 to buy beer, but you don't have to be 21 to purchase an AR-15. And you may be aware, in our country, we've had some massacres, horrible events with guns. So that's part of the political environment that we're in. There's been a long history of women fighting for their rights, like the right to vote or the right to have agency over their body. And now there's a threat of those rights being taken away by our Supreme Court. After 50 years of having reproductive rights, those are in jeopardy. The US has been known for its democracy and its constitution. We even had a former president who resigned after being accused of lying and breaking the law. And now we have a former president, a recent president, who's been accused of lying and breaking the law. And he's thinking about running for president again. The political climate has just changed dramatically in the past 50, 60 years. And in terms of education, about 60 years ago, a law was changed where it allowed Black children to attend the same schools as white children. Up until that time, we had what was called segregation. There were white-only schools and Black-only schools. But to make that happen 60 years ago, it actually took some federal marshals, in this case, to escort Ruby Bridges, who was 6 years old, going into her first grade classroom. The other white parents were so angry about that, they took all the children out of that class, and she was the only student in first grade. Her teacher worked with her one-on-one because the parents were so mad that a Black child would be allowed into their building. And now what we have school board meetings where we have neo-fascists called the Proud Boys disrupting board meetings because they want to have policies, again, going back to segregation. It's white supremacist thinking. We've kind of almost gone full circle in that case. Things are falling apart and it's impacting education. Again, this is the political environment that we're working in many of the communities in our country. So there's three types of governing bodies that make laws in our country. You can make laws at the national level, it affects everyone, or at the state level, that's a smaller area, or the local level. And at the national level, laws, of course, are being made about things like the voting or about guns and about education. And those laws are made by elected representatives in this building called the Capitol. You may have seen this building in the news in the past year. It's the same building where the Proud Boys that I mentioned earlier invaded the Capitol with the intent of overthrowing an election and disrupting democracy, taking over the country. In our country, education laws, national laws, are usually called acts. And two acts that we have that are significant. One is the IDEA Act that ensures that differently able children get the resources they need. Another act would be the ESSA Act, or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and that ensures that families in low income or low performing children are also able to get the resources they need. So that's at the national level. I live in one of the 50 states. I live in North Carolina, about where that red dot is. Gives you, there's the USA. So I'm very close to the ocean. And my state of North Carolina has 100 counties. The state has been divided up into all these 100 pieces. And there is a General Assembly building where, again, elected officials are making laws that are, in terms of education, are called statutes. And these statutes are for all of the schools in my state of North Carolina. In addition to having a statute that requires children to go to school, there's even a statute for corporal punishment that allows school principals or school leaders to physically paddle students who misbehave. There's another statute in North Carolina that allows principals or school leaders to kick children out of school as young as 4 years old, again, for minor infractions, for things like inappropriate language, or not following the rules, or showing disrespect. So as you can tell, some of these statutes are not fair and are really inappropriate at the state level. And then I live in the county, in one of the 100 counties called New Hanover County. I'm right by the ocean, and the rules or laws that are made in this case are called policies. And here we have 7 elected officials that make what are called the school board policies. And each member is elected for a 4-year term. They're a little bit staggered. We have 4 seats that will be open for our elections in November coming up. But let me just give you a sense of some of the policies that they've been dealing with in the past year, and again, the political environment that we're working. When COVID came, there were a lot of debate as to whether or not children should be required to wear masks in school, or if parents should have that choice. There was a lot of fear on the parents of government overreach. There's been concerns about allowing transgender students to participate in middle school sports. And there were religious groups and the Proud Boys came out protesting that. They've had to deal with a law school concept called critical race theory. And they're saying, oh, critical race theory is making our children hate themselves and hate their country, and it shouldn't be taught in schools. Well, it's not taught in public schools because, as I say, it's at a graduate level in law school. But again, this is kind of conjuring up fear in our community. There's a huge pushback against what we call equity, diversity, and inclusion, where we're making sure that all children are represented in the materials that they're working with. They're represented by the adults that are working with them, and that everyone is being treated in an equitable way. A lot of pushback. Some of the candidates running for the Board of Education have promised to eliminate any committee or any employee that deals directly with issues such as equity, diversity, or inclusion. We have seclusion rooms as a hot topic. Imagine a closet that has padding on it, and a child, usually a special education child, is placed in the room when they are supposedly out of control. The use of seclusion rooms in this county is astounding. It's being overused. It's being used for inappropriate reasons. There was a report from one parent, their child was walking backwards in the school hallway and was placed in a seclusion room for that. Just outrageous. There's a cry for banning books so that the LGBTQ plus community is, is not represented for fear that those books will start grooming children and that they'll become LGBTQ adults, which again is totally absurd, or it's the whitewashing of our horrible racist history in our country. And money is a huge issue as well. Our teachers say that they're underpaid, they're overworked, they're disrespected, and the district is trying to work with the county, and the district and our county officials fight over the money. And so really nobody wins in the struggle. Makes you wonder why anyone would want to be a school board member with all of these issues. The last one is the one that I ended up focusing on, and that was to end suspensions of 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds in our school. The bottom line is the research shows that out of school suspensions, kicking a student or child out of school is bad for everyone at any age. But we knew that politically, it would be easier to start with a small ask and focus just on our youngest children to see if we could change a policy that would stop suspensions of children, again, for minor infractions. And it was about, I don't know, about 13, 14 months ago, I met another educator who had worked in New Hanover County named Veronica McLaurin Brown. You'll see her picture shortly. And together we started a group called Love Our Children because we wanted to see if we could change this one policy. Again, the research is overwhelming. There's decades of research showing the inappropriateness of suspensions. And the fact is, there's not a single piece of research that shows that suspensions change student behavior for the better, or improve school climate, or help children have more academic success. All of the research shows the harm of out-of-school suspensions. So
Peter, there's kind of a square box in the middle of your screen. If you can move it a little bit to a side, just to be able to read that well.
Let's see, you say there's a square box?
Like in the middle of the presentation. If you see anything that you can move, otherwise we're fine to continue. It's just
can you see this as a blue screen?
Yeah.
It's all
okay.
perfect. I can see presentation well. It's just in case you had like the video Zoom in the middle or something. Yeah, otherwise, it's I can see it terrific. I wanted to read everything because it's looking great.
So I don't have any other anything else on my screen at the moment. So I'll keep going, but just stop me if you need to. So our school district has hundreds of policies of everything you could possibly imagine. Whether or not parents can come into school to volunteer, if children are able to participate in after-school activities. Things about lunch, things about health. Well, one of the policies is specifically about out-of-school suspensions, and it specifically talks about minor violations can lead to an out-of-school suspension. This policy has a couple of problems, as does many of the policies at the state level and our local level, and that is it's a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't differentiate between our 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds and our 14, 15, 16, and 17-year-olds. It's treating them exactly the same. Part of my background is early childhood education, and we know that the brain is functioning differently for our youngest learners compared to our teenagers. And yet they're all being treated, or they're all being dealt with a single policy. The other huge problem with this policy is its disparate application. Our school district is represented by about 61% of the children are white, and about 18% of the children are Black students. But when you look at the suspension rates, almost 60% of the suspensions are Black students, and only 24 are the white students. So something is terribly wrong with how the decision is being made as to who is being kicked out of school. When we looked a little bit closer at the elementary schools, we were finding that 40% of the suspensions in elementary school were children who were 4, 5, 6, and 7 years old. That would represent about 355 suspensions a year of our youngest learners. And here's, they go to school to learn, and the school decides to kick them out. What's the logic in that? They receive no extra support when they're out of school. They don't receive any additional support when they come back to help them re-enter whatever it was that they may have been doing wrong. Again, that there was no rhyme or reason or no good logic as to why we'd be kicking kids out of school. This actually is a breakdown of the 24 elementary schools. I think it's about 24. And you'll notice that some of the schools had really high suspension rates. It won't surprise you to know those are also the schools that were predominantly Black in terms of student population. Our schools, for a period of time that the court had ordered our schools to be integrated, where there were Black and white students, and at some point they did so well that the judge decided, well, we don't need to give you a court order, you're doing a great job. And as soon as they weren't required to do it, the schools became segregated again. The progress from 60 years ago just totally dismantled, and the punishment seemed to increase with the Black students. When we looked at the reasons why students were being suspended, it really made our heads spin, because there were no definitions of these. These are pretty subjective terms. An aggressive 4-year-old looks a lot different than an aggressive 14-year-old. Or if you have 2 6-year-olds fighting, it's very different than 2 16-year-olds fighting. And what is insubordination anyway, to a 5-year-old? That sounds pretty normal to me. Cross their arms, say, no, I don't want to do that. We're looking at typical young child behavior, and it's being punished and it being criminalized. The research shows that children who are kicked out of school and suspended are more likely to end up in our juvenile justice system. And again, that's why it's not good for any student to be kicked out. What was interesting too was in the policy, it talked about alternatives to suspensions, things you could do before suspending a child. And yet what we found anecdotally was that a child would misbehave, there would be no intervention, and they would just be kicked out. They weren't actually even enforcing their own policy as well. Another reason to bring about the change. So our goal for our group called Love Our Children was just to add one sentence to the policy. We looked for a solution that would be the simplest to implement. They didn't have to rewrite the whole policy. They only needed to add one sentence that would indicate that our youngest learners, would simply not be suspended, for minor offenses. We had to keep in the idea that they could be suspended for guns or drugs because there were state laws that mandated that. Guns and drugs are not allowed in the school. But even then, we would argue if a 5-year-old brings a gun to school, their intent is a lot different than a 15-year-old. Maybe they thought it was a toy. And the 6-year-old that brings a drug to school, there's a chance it looked like candy to them. It may have been curiosity. Hope would be even in those cases, it would be done on an individual basis and not just done on its, just be done as a one-size-fits-all solution. So the question then becomes, so how do you change a local Board of Education policy? Let me go through some of the things that we did to change the policy. And a good place to start is obviously talking to the board itself. You'll see a podium there, and that's once a month. The community is invited to speak. You only get 2 minutes of time, but you get to speak to the board and speak publicly about your concerns. And so that is what we did. Every month, we would go and speak for 2 minutes, knowing or finding out that the board rarely listened to us, but it was an excellent opportunity to educate the community because these meetings were also broadcast live, and we could also get video clips, which is what we did. We took our video clips of our speeches, put them on our own YouTube channel, and then would push those out onto social media as well, so people could hear what we were saying, hear the data we had collected, and be more educated about it. We also created a letter writing campaign where the goal was to send emails to all the board members, again, with the data, with the research, with our concerns, so that they would have their mailboxes, full. We also, this is Veronica. Veronica and I were committed to talking to anybody who would sit down and listen to us. Actually, it was more listening for us. We were interested in what their concerns were. And what we found in really every case, no one could believe that 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds were being kicked out of school. They had never heard of that before. They were unaware of it. So educating the public really became our biggest crusade. We needed just more people to be aware of it and to show up. We did some neighborhood organizing. We found not only did we speak with church leaders and community leaders, business leaders, we found some leaders in neighborhoods, in this case in a housing project, where we could sit down and try to organize, sit down with groups of people and tell them our story, tell them what was going on in the schools, and then try to get them to show up at the board meetings with us. We showed up at community events, anytime there was especially family events, because we knew that the people that would want to hear the story the most were parents that had children in the schools. So we would set up information tables. One of the faith leaders we worked with actually printed up some information cards for us. They're actually two-sided cards. One side had our logo and some information, and the other side had some of the data that we were sharing as well. So that gave us a chance to spread the word. Those were passed out at different churches. We also made sure that we were reaching everyone, or as many people as we could in the community. And so we had some people help translate our signs, our information cards, our speeches into Spanish, so that other people would become aware of it in our Latinx community. We participated in community forums. We actually found a nonprofit organization that was working in the Black community, and they hosted 2 forums for us that were broadcast live, so we could spread the word again in different parts of town again, and people were just not aware this was going on. We held our own press conferences, because one way to keep control of the narrative is to present your own messaging. And because of our press conferences, we got TV news coverage, we got newspaper coverage, and we also got radio coverage. So the press conferences gave us access to other news outlets in our community to help us spread the word. On social media, we had set up a Facebook page, and on the Facebook page every day I would post a meme. And part of the messaging in the case of this one was about the school board. There were 7 white school board members. We would say that they were doing nothing. Month after month, they took no action. One reason was it wasn't on their radar. Their children had never been suspended. Their grandchildren had never been suspended. Their friends' children had never been suspended. Their neighbors' children, they had no investment. It didn't matter to them. They didn't care because no one they knew had been impacted by that. So having different memes that people could post or repost helped get the message out. You may have seen earlier, we had set up a QR code that would allow people to access our website. And on our website, we had a petition that individuals could sign. And we had a resolution that organizations could sign as well. So we were just continuing to try to get the word out. We eventually invested in a billboard for a month. We paid for 10 electronic billboards. That meant that every 15 minutes, our message would come up for about 8 seconds throughout the day at 10 different locations for a whole month. And we know that was effective in putting pressure on the board, because one of the board members complained about it at one of the meetings, that they'd even got billboards out there, talking about this, saying we need to do something. But again, month after month, no action was taken. One of the other things that I had done, and we'll see if this works, was I wrote a song that's on our website, and it just kind of frames our main issue about it. And if this works, I'd love to. It's a 2-minute song. It has to be a 2-minute song because I sang it to the school board, so it had to fit in the 2-minute time slot. But this will just give you an idea of some of our messaging that we were doing. Let's see if this works.
Sometimes they whisper, sometimes they shout, sometimes feel all they wiggle about. They may obey or be out of control. They're just 4, 5, 6, and 7 years old. You got to love our children. Love our children. You got to love our children and keep them learning in school. They've been suspended when they show disrespect. They've been suspended when they throw an object. They've been kicked out when they don't do as they're told. They act like 4, 5, 6, and 7 years old. We gotta love our children. You got to love our children. You got to love our children and keep them learning in school. Out of school may be the last resort, but the kids don't get help. They get no support. When they miss their lesson and get left behind, they're going to school, to prison, private life. Listen, what's all this talk about equity if you won't change your policy? Stop the stalling and the rigmarole. They're only 4, 5, 6, and 7 years old. You got to love our children. Love our children. You got to love our children and keep them learning in school. Yeah. Hey, you got to love our children. Love our children. You got to love our children and keep them learning in school. Yeah, I'm talking to you, school board.
So that's probably a good place for me to stop. After 13 months of doing all of these things that I've shared with you, the school board we actually finally flipped the school board. They went from 13 months ago to voting 7-0 to keep the policy as it was, and then flipping it completely, where all 7 board members agreed that they would end out of school suspensions for 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds for the coming school year. I'm stopping only because I want to keep keeping an eye on time, but we were able to use their own data to show them that it was possible to do that, and that it wasn't going to cost a lot of extra money, and that, again, it just made sense. I think what really helped was that although we started out with just Veronica and I speaking at the board, by 13 months, we had 10, 12 people speaking, taking up to a third, almost a half of their speaking time. We just kept showing up in our shirts in the front row, and I think they got tired of us. And it was that public pressure for 13 months that finally gave us the result that we were looking for. I'll stop there for now.
Wow. So inspiring, Peter.
Amazing work. I mean, there wasn't any more options to send that message out.
Yeah.
I mean, I have been writing all the things that you try, and it was like, okay, I'm gonna need another paper. Really, it's true. Like, educating the public and making that pressure is a really good way to start the change.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, you were saying you found someone who was brave enough to do it. It wasn't the bravery; it was just the persistence. I mean, working on it every week. Veronica and I were always meeting with people. We were reaching out to different groups, and using every opportunity. We had badges that said "Love Our Children," T-shirts that said "Love Our Children," and so in the grocery store, the cashier would say, "Oh, tell me what that's about." We would talk to anybody who would listen, And I think as more people became educated, I think word got out, you know, we have a harmful policy that has gone on unchallenged for decades. And it was time to do it now. The district had a plan to change it like 3 years from now. We were like, why would you want to continue the harm for 3 more years?
Yeah.
And just do it. Just make the decision. You're the boss. The employees will follow. You know, just make it happen. And they are now, finally.
Wow.
But we didn't give up, and we were prepared to do it as long as it took. I think it's just being persistent that really, having patience and being persistent that made the difference for us.
Wow, completely. Yeah, no, I mean, that persistence definitely came
And
across.
persistent during 13 months is
Yeah,
a lot.
of not getting a yes, and then keep coming back in every month, meeting with the Board of Education. I also, a couple of things I noticed from there was very clear objective. I think that probably just for people that are thinking about activism in education, like you didn't go to change the whole school functioning. You went for something very specific, 4 to 7 years old, that are being left out of school and it's damaging them. And then a very clear message that, because the objective is so focused, then you can be very clear about how to communicate that and making very memorable in any of those interactions. So that's fantastic. Top learnings for us as well in our work of really knowing what you're aiming for and how to communicate it.
Because when it's too vague, then
Yes,
you don't really know what is going on or what is changing, and being clear and really specific, that really helps.
Yeah. Any other advice, Peter, that you will have for people that are considering activism in education?
Well, I think, you know, knowing the facts, and fortunately, in our case, all of the suspensions had to be reported to the state, our state education department. And so we had public access to all the data that we needed. We also requested data from the school district, and they fortunately gave it to us as well. So I think knowing the facts and data, if the issue you're working on, you know, lends itself to that kind of information. I think that, again, I've said it more than once, but educating the public. If you're just within your small group, your small bubble of people know about something, that's not going to bring change. You need to find different ways, different avenues of just reaching out to as many people as you can, and just keep repeating the focused message over and over again. And finally, just realizing that you can have control over your narrative. When the school board talked about suspensions, or when they had someone come and speak, that they had a whole different narrative, that they were talking about how difficult this would be. You have to have a culture change to make this happen, a culture shift. I'm like, you don't need a culture shift to do that. That's ridiculous. If our country had waited for a culture shift about women getting the right to vote, we'd only have white male landowners voting, as we did, you know, almost over 200 years ago. You don't wait for the culture shift. You do what's right. And that's what motivated us, and that's what we asked the board to do. Do the right thing, and just repeating that over and over again. So press conferences, you have your own messaging. Songs, you have your own messaging, and you know, all the social media, you have control over what it is you want to say. And so that would be my other piece of advice.
Wow. So powerful. And yeah, I completely agree. You just have to do what's right, and that's the energy also that powers you through all that persistence that you needed to have along those 13 months, which is a lot.
Because
Wow,
it's that kind of faith that it's gonna happen.
It's so empowering, Peter, to hear you. And we would like to know a bit more as well about what you're working on at the moment, because we know that you didn't get tired out of it. You decided to keep on moving ahead.
There's several. I have several projects I'm working on. I'll try to say each one briefly. Looking ahead for our Love Our Children, our next responsibility now is to educate the public that the policy has changed. It wasn't celebrated that they changed the policy. That's talking about the narrative, that the school district kept it pretty quiet. That Love Our Children, after 13 months, were successful, that was not a celebration on their part. That would have been a defeat on their part. So we need to make sure that when the new school year starts, our next mission is to educate the public, the communities, that these have changed. And if they feel their child has been suspended for an inappropriate reason, that we can serve as advocates for them in the school to make sure that they get the justice that they deserve. So that's where I am with Love Our Children. I had mentioned the seclusion rooms, these horrible padded closets. We're not leading the charge on that, but there's another woman in our community who's been fighting for that for more than a couple of years. And so while school is out of session, we're working with her, and where she has been one speaker at the board meeting, we're now getting our 10 speakers or more to say, let's show up for her and amplify her voice, give her, make that noticeable. And the media picked it up. I actually got a phone call from the newspaper saying, I noticed that all your speakers were talking about, ending seclusion rooms. Well, that's what we wanted. We wanted people to notice. Now that's picking up some steam. So we're working on that. The third thing I would tell you is, because of our work and because of the dysfunction of our local school board, Veronica, who I've been working with, has decided to run for the Board of Education. We changed one policy. If she could serve on the board, potentially she could impact many more policies. So that's really upping the game. And I'm helping out with her campaign to get her elected in November as well. So that takes courage. As I say, when I listed all the issues that are swirling around in our community, and the environment of hate and the environment of fear that is pushing in negative ways on education, it takes a lot of courage to want to deal with those types of things. And as I said, there were 7 white board members. Veronica and I had this debate. I would say, you need to run. She said, no, you need to run. I would say, they don't need another old white guy on the board, that they need representation from the community. She had taught in the district for over 35 years and had worked as principal and worked with the superintendent. So she's highly qualified and is bringing a message of hope and positive change for the children, families, and also our teachers and staff. So, so those are 3 projects that I'm working on at this point, and there's plenty to do, I assure you.
Amazing work. Completely necessary, because and that's how change starts at the local level, and then I hope that more people start picking up all those ideas and they start spreading around the world.
Yeah, and also I think focusing our energies, because many times I feel that when we speak with some teachers, they feel frustrated by the restrictions of the system, the fact that they need to do all the testing that they don't see the point on. But then it's focusing our energies, first of all, in our area of control. What can you actually do within your classroom? For instance, not using that end of suspension policy, even if it's a Bible. If you already know that that's not good for your students, then just don't use that policy. Changing the dynamics within the classroom, that's completely within the area of control. Training yourself about more democratic, horizontal ways of learning and growing. Then the next one, it's the area of influence, which is where you're playing now, Peter, of influencing those policies, educating the public. We cannot control other people's behaviors, but we can influence what they're the information that they have to make decisions, and to make that information super evident and obvious and in all the billboards and everywhere that we can, if we're really committed to it. And then the other part is that area out of control that doesn't deserve our energies, because if that's something that we cannot influence, for instance, now at the country level, at the whole of the United States, there's no point on just crying every night about that, wasting all our energies, when the place where we can put them is at the local level, changing things that actually have an impact on the children in our community.
You had mentioned at the beginning, we had met when I had organized a group called When Public Schools Reopen, We Don't Want to Go Back to Normal. My original vision was to bring about change at the national level, but learned very quickly that what I had the most impact, what I could have the most impact on, was in my own backyard, in my own community. So I let go of the big dream and said, let me model for others what might happen. Let me do the hard work. Let me see if I can bring about change with the hope. Well, actually, there have been some people have been asking, well, you know, I'm in one of the 100 counties in North Carolina. Another project might be, what if we got another county to change it, and then another county? It turns out that there are 11 states of the 50 states of the United States, 11 that have banned out of school suspensions at their, you know, at the state level. It's one of their education statutes that they've created. You know, maybe I could help. We can educate other counties and get them to do that. So North Carolina could become, you know, the 12th state to ban that as well. But it's true. If you take on the big things, it can be really frustrating and depressing. If you can focus on one small piece. We often call what we were doing just like we were an ant taking a bite out of the elephant. And the elephant in the room is huge. But if we just keep working on taking our little bites, you know, little by little, we'll bring about the change that we hope for.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for sharing all of this.
Yeah,
It's been super inspiring, and the presentation was fantastic. And when you said you had some images to share, it really illustrated very visually the message that you were sharing. So thank you for sharing with us, with our community. We're gonna share this on YouTube, and I'm sure there's gonna be lots of reactions and lots of people inspired to start doing things within their local spaces to influence beyond their classroom, beyond their family, on how well educated people are about what needs to change in education policies.
Very good, and I'm happy to share with you both my email address and the link to our website if they want to read more story, and you're welcome to share that with your learning community as well.
Sure, let's add that in all the messages. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. This has been a pleasure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye
Have
bye.
a great day.
Bye.